Well, that's going to be tough to follow. Told my wife, all I need to do is get up and give the invitation. A lot of lessons in the songs that we sang this morning, and you know, as a preacher and one that prepares sermons to get up and teach and talk about, I got a lot of sermons from the songs that we sang just a second ago. From the very first song that we sang, there was a line in that song that really stuck out to me. In the third verse of that song, it says, "He still loves me, me the sinner. What a sorrow if I lost him." Again, this has nothing to do with my lesson, but that last part there, what a sorrow if I lost him. He doesn't go from us, we lose him. And again, that would be a great sermon. Lots of points. That last song we sang gets me every time. Every single time we sing that song, how our God, how great he is. I guess Carrie had a great lesson in there today about how great God is and all that he's done, and the kids were telling me about it. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the feedback that he gets and stuff. And you look out into the world and you see, I mentioned this before class, how beautiful of a Sunday morning this is today. We know things in Oklahoma, it's going to change tomorrow. It's going to be cold and probably windy, but God has brought everything back to life with this rain. Man, it was looking dreary there for a while. Our hopes were, I planted a little wheat. I needed some wheat to get some cattle through the winter, where you didn't have to buy as much hay. And this rain has been a huge blessing. Things were starting to look drear. And it's amazing the God that we have, the power that he has, and how he blesses us. Also how he puts us, we have trials. There's things that happen to us, and sometimes we sit back and wonder, but don't let those sorrows be an ultimate demise to us, as that first song. What a sorrow it would be if we lost him. What a sorrow it would be, and that's up to us. That's up to us. I want to go to a simple lesson this morning, one that we've all heard, one that we all has stuck out in our minds from little kids, about Daniel in the lion's den. And there's so many lessons that can be drawn from Daniel in the lion's den, from faith to persecution to people setting you up to how you came out of it. All these different things, how your faithfulness and God sees you and you are as a Christian, and how people that are unfaithful, people that are not Christians, how they look at you. They look at you in several different ways. Again, there's so many lessons, and we're going to hit on a lot of these lessons this morning of Daniel in the lion's den, and how he was set up, and how he was thrown in the lion's den, and all these things. Again, a great lesson that we can go back to, and we can learn so many things from. I want to start in Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 1. I mentioned in class today that I have been truly blessed the last 6 months. My wife, she keeps me in line, because I've had 4 grandbabies born in the last 6 months, and she keeps me in line with all their names. And I mentioned in class earlier 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks coming this Thursday, I have a granddaughter that will turn 2 weeks old. Heather, my second oldest daughter, had a little girl, and right after the little girl was born, she had problems breathing, and my daughter spiked a really high fever, and they couldn't figure out either one. And the granddaughter was just seconds away from going into NICU. They were fixing to grab her and take her into NICU, and my daughter was having some other complications. And then, just like nothing, everything came together and was back to normal. And they have been great ever since then. And she's home. They're doing well. They were released on time. It's amazing how everything just came back together and was how it's supposed to be. But again, I'm not even going to... Rylan. Is it Rylan? I got it right that time. Okay. Rylan. Rylan is the granddaughter's name. Debbie told me that I need to write all these down on my arms so I can reference. I said, I'm not going to have enough arms. She said, good thing you have long arms. And But yeah, it's God's amazing. I want to start here in Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Let me read these first 10 verses here. Listen to the things. And as you read this, you're going to be like, man, this is real life today. These things happen today. And it's crazy how these things happen and how we see this. And you're going to probably take your mind to a situation that you've been in. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 6 in Daniel, it says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom David was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would not suffer loss." So here the king Darius, he's just taken over. He's just taken over for Nebuchadnezzar, and he set over these 120 satraps to watch over the kingdom, make sure everything was being done right. And over these 120 satraps, I hope I'm saying that right, he put 3 governors. And of one of those 3 governors was Daniel. In verse 3 it says, "Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm." We know how that is. In every situation, you have one that rises above, the cream rises to the top, and everybody looked at him. It didn't say that he put himself, and he wasn't one that just brown-nosed and made his way. It said, what did it say of him? It gave a good report of him. It says, because of an excellent spirit was in him. This is why he rose to the top. There was an excellent spirit in him. The king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. All right? We don't see a problem so far. But in your minds, what's going to happen with these other 22 people? There's 120 satraps and there's 2 other governors. All right? That he's over all these. He's rose to the top because of his good spirit. Because of his godliness. Because of his fairness, because of his work ethic, because of his faithfulness. Just say all those things. His godliness. He rose to the top. He was of excellent spirit. So in verse 4, the governors and the satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel. Here they go, those 122. We can't just take it, this guy's a good guy and he's going to be our leader. He's going to be head. We're going to look to him. He's fair. He's honest. He's godly. All these things. No. They sought to find fault in him. Did your mind just go to the New Testament and Jesus? Here they sought to find fault in him. What did Jesus? Jesus did nothing but good. Daniel said nothing but good. And then they sought to find fault in him. All right? Sought to find a charge against him concerning the kingdom. But they could not find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. They couldn't find anything. Case closed, right? No, we know the case isn't closed. Same thing with Jesus. Couldn't find any fault in Jesus. What did they have to do? They had to find a lie. They had to get a lie, do something to find something. Make their own rule that he's going to break. All right? They couldn't find a fault in him. Why would they not just stop there? Why do you want to take somebody down? It makes no sense. So here we go on in verse 5. So it says, "Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." And they didn't have a law of his God yet. All right? So there wasn't anything against him going and doing and praying and serving his God the way he was. He found no fault in the way he treated their government or anybody else. Everything was great. Everything was perfect. Everything was faithful. Everything was honest in him. So in verse 6 it says, "So these governors, the satraps, they thronged before the king and said thus to him, 'King Darius, live forever. what's the first thing they do? They don't go to him with the decree and say, hey, sign this. This ought to be good. They go to him praising him, putting him on a pedestal. All right? And acknowledging him. King Darius, live forever. All right, so here they are. They're building him up. They're saying, hey, we're here to support you. We have your back. We're putting you on a pedestal. Making him feel good, all right? Verse 7 says, and the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and the satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute, to make a firm decree, that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the lion's den. All homage for the next 30 days goes to you, King Darius. Anyone that shows homage, that shows anything to another god, another person, any other entity, they're going to be thrown into the lion's den. You are going to be praised. No one but you for the next 30 days, King Darius. We're going to put forth this decree. Verse 8, it says, now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. King Darius, we want you to sign this. We want to praise you. We want to honor you for the next 30 days and nobody else. Sign this decree, because it is the history of the Persians and the Medes that the law does not alter. It stays the same. No one can change it. This decree is signed. This is the way it's going to be. All right? There wasn't no changing. Even if the king himself wanted to change it, because of the way and the customs and the history and the traditions was, he could not change it. So in verse 9 it says, therefore King Darius signed the written decree. Sounded good to him, didn't it? Didn't have a whole lot of time to sit on it and think about it. Who else is this going to affect if I sign this? What else is going to happen if I sign this? Who all is going to be affected? Will I have friends? Will I have people that I like? People that I hold highly in esteem? Is it going to affect any of them? He didn't think about it. He signed it. They put him in a pressure situation. They were praising him. And so he signed this decree. Unfortunately, in our life, there's good men. Good men, such as Daniel here. We see it as we go through the epistles. We've seen example after example in the Bible how good men are mistreated by their fellow men. I want to go to a few scriptures here. Psalms chapter 55 and verse 17. Jumping ahead of myself just a second. I want to go ahead and read verse 10 here in Daniel chapter 6. It says, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room he went to his window. With his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day. And he prayed and he gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. All right, he knew the law, didn't he? He knew the law, the decree that had been signed. But did he waver in his faithfulness to God? The things that he did every day. What did it say there? It says he went and he opened the windows, right? In his upper room, in the windows, and he faced towards Jerusalem and he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day. It didn't say he hid, did he? He didn't keep the windows closed so nobody could see him. He didn't do it in secret. He went and he did what he had been doing. He was accustomed to doing all his life. All right? The things that he was accustomed to doing as paying homage to God and praying to God and praising God. All right? Daniel was not going to stop being faithful just to appease others. Did they know this about him? They knew this about him. They knew what he was going to do, didn't they? Why? Because it said before he was faithful. They knew the person that Daniel was and how much he loved his God. That's why they put such a decree together. They knew they could get him. They knew they could throw him in the lion's den, but they didn't know what was going to happen next. They knew what he was going to do. They knew this decree wasn't going to stop him. Because if it would have stopped him, what use would it have been? They'd have had to find something else. They knew what Daniel was going to do. And Daniel didn't do it he kept doing what he was accustomed to do. Daniel wasn't going to stop just to please them. I want to go again, Psalms chapter 55, verse 17. Look what it says here. It says, evening and morning and noon, I will pray, I'll cry aloud, and he will hear my voice. Daniel knew this. Daniel did this. Something that we need to do. Every morning, every evening, and at noon, I will pray and with a loud voice, and he will hear my voice. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 17, a little short verse in the Bible, one that we should memorize. Pray without ceasing. All right, there's example after example throughout the Bible of what we're supposed to be doing. And examples of those like Daniel doing it, and David, as it talks about in Psalms, and Paul telling the Thessalonians, pray without ceasing. I want to go to Proverbs chapter 22 real quick. Proverbs chapter 22, and I better hurry here. I'm going to be running close out of time. Proverbs 22 and verse 29, it says, do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men. Again, that describes Daniel right there, right? The very first part. Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. I want to back up to Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 3. See what happens to this man. Proverbs 11 and verse 3, it says, the integrity of the upright will guide them. Again, we've seen this with Daniel. But the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. Not only will it destroy those that are perverse, they're going to seek to take down everybody else that there's around them. Everybody else that's living uprightly, everybody else that's doing what they're supposed to be doing. Again, yes, let's pray without ceasing. That's the example that Daniel set there. They knew he was going to do this. They knew that he was a godly man. As Christians, we have to remain faithful no matter what happens in our life. And we're going to get into that as we continue to study Paul in our classes man, it's going to be thrown at Paul. That's why the study of Paul's life is such a good study. It is all the things that he went through, all the persecution that he went through. Let's go to 2 Timothy, starting in verse 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. It's Paul talking to Timothy here. It says, for I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day. And not to only me, but also all those who have loved his appearing. Again, that's a verse that we should have in the back of our minds, that we should be able to be saying those things as we come to the end of life. As Paul knew, his time on earth was almost over, and he says, I have fought the good fight. I have kept the faith. No matter what was thrown at me, I have done what I'm supposed to do. There's nothing that veered me off course. As I mentioned in that verse that we read, don't lose him. As that verse I read in that song, what a sorrow it would be if I lost him. What a sorrow it would be. Wouldn't be able to say this at the end of your life. I have fought the good fight. Paul says, I have finished the race. He knew his time was almost over. He's ran the race. I want to go to Revelations. The Revelations chapter 2 and verse 10. We know it says in that verse to be faithful unto death. But look at the first part of this verse. Revelations chapter 2 and verse 10. very end of that verse, it says again, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of righteousness. But the beginning of that, a lot of times we skip over. It says, do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Again, as I mentioned in class this morning, we're blessed as Americans, as American citizens in a country where the persecution is really, really non-existent. There's very little, but we can see those rights being tested as we go on in this life, and how those rights could be coming to an end. But as Christians now, we're blessed. We're not facing these kind of persecutions. Take advantage of it. I want to go back to Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 11, and see what happens here in these next few verses. Daniel 6, 11 through 17. It says, and these men assembled, and they found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God, which they knew he was going to do. In verse 12 it says, and they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any other god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast in the lion's den? And the king answered and said, this thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. I signed it. This law cannot be altered. I can't change it. This decree is yes, I did this. In verse 13 it says, so they answered and said before the king, that Daniel who is is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And when the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. How did I not think about Daniel? How did I not think about Daniel's what he's thinking when he signed this decree? Because he was approached by these men, and they praised him. They put him on a pedestal and said, we're all going to praise you. Sign this decree that we all praise you for 30 days, and no other god or other man shall be petitioned. Only you. You're the greatest. And he didn't think about his friend Daniel, someone that he had much respect for. And he thought all night long till the sun went down, the sun came up, what can I do? But it was tradition, it was law, he had to be a lawful king. He signed it. He signed it, but look what he knew. Look what he knew was going to happen. It says, then these men approached the king and said in verse 15, said to the king, know, O king, that this law of the Medes and Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So the king gave command that they brought Daniel out, and they cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. He pondered this all night long, and they knew he was pondering it. They said, King, you signed this. We can't change this. You know that you can't change this. You know that this has to be done. And he commanded that he be brought and thrown into the lion's den. And he went and he told Daniel himself, your God will deliver you from this. He knew God, didn't he? He knew God through Daniel, and he knew how Daniel's God, the God that Daniel served, how he was. And he said, he will deliver you. And in verse 17 it says, then a stone was brought and laid at the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of the Lord's, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Again, the king had to be a lawful king. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to bring this punishment. but he had to do it according to tradition. Christians, we're going to have those ones that are wanting to do harm to us. Again, as we see those rights as American citizens, we see those being infringed on. We see those rights being tinkered with, and to the point that we think that they're going to be taken away one day, and we hope they don't. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12, it says, "Yes, and all who desire to live a godly in Christ will suffer persecution." That's talking to us. We will suffer persecution. And persecution comes in a lot of different ways. Being ridiculed by friends, not being promoted in certain things because of the stance you take. We see persecution in lots of different ways. It's not just cast into jail, stoned, shot, all these different things, put to death. But there's persecution in so many ways. And if we live a godly life, Paul tells Timothy, Paul tells us in 2 Timothy 3 and 12 again, yes, all who desire to live godly. That doesn't leave anyone out. It says all. All that desire to live godly in Christ Jesus, you will suffer persecution in one way or another. We're going to have those that want to do us harm. John 15 and verse 18 says, if the world hates you, know first that it hated me. The world hated me first. That's what Jesus says. Know if they hate you, remember, they hated me first. Look at the protection. Again, King Darius knew. He told Daniel, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. God will deliver us. And I keep going back to that song that we sang first in that one small little section there. What a sorrow be if we lost him. That is up to us. God is there to protect us. No one can separate us from God. They may do something to this body. They may do something to this physical body. But only we can separate ourselves from God. Only we can lose him, as it's said in that song. What a sorrow be if we lost him. Nobody can lose him for us. Nobody can separate us from him. We are the only ones that can do that for ourselves. Don't let the world, like they did here with Daniel. This was a way for them to separate him from God, and he wouldn't do it. He stuck to with what he was supposed to be doing. He remained faithful unto the point of death. No one can separate us but ourselves from God. Let's look at the protection of extremes here. Starting in verse 18 through 23. It says, now the king went to the palace and he spent the night fasting. And no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. We talked about Paul in class, the 3 days and the 3 nights, no food, and constant prayer. That was a dark, dark time in his life. We sang in a song just a second ago, Night with Eben Pinion, brooded o'er the veil. That night was hard on Jesus. He was alone. He was by himself, and he prayed, Abba, Father, Father. If it's your will, if there's anything else that can be done. There's a petition to the Father. Paul, as he knew that he was persecuting Jesus, putting Christians to death, and was waiting for Ananias to come to him, sat there 3 days and 3 nights without food, without drink, praying constantly. Jesus praying constantly in the garden. And look at King Darius. This was a rough night for him. This was a dear friend of his. A dear friend of his. And look what he's doing. It says, and now the king, he went into the palace and he spent the night fasting. No musicians were brought before him, and also his sleep went from him. He didn't sleep all night. He was worried. He was thinking of his friend and what he had done to him. And then the king arose very early in the morning, and he went in haste to the lion's den. As soon as he could, as soon as that time was up, and he could go out there and check on him, he took off to go check on him early in the morning. And when he came to the den, he cried out With a lamenting voice to Daniel, the king spoke, saying, Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? And then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. King Darius knew more than likely he was going to be delivered. But he's human. He's still human, and he was worried about his friend. And when he heard those words, O king, live forever. And Daniel said, My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lion, so that they will not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. Also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. I haven't done anything wrong to you, king. God shut the mouths of the lions. He knows I didn't do anything contrary to him. I am a faultless person, as he says here. Verse 23, it says, Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up and out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no injury whatsoever was found on him, because he believed in his God. He wasn't going to lose his God. He was going to do whatever it took to please God first. He was also found faultless before the king. Again, only we can lose that. His faithfulness. And King Darius knew that about him, and he knew, as he told him before, your God, who you serve continually, he's going to take care of you. But again, still in the back of his mind, he had to know. What a great moment that was for King Darius to realize that. Again, Daniel was he really held high esteem for Daniel. We have to be confident in God's protection over us. We have to be confident again, and I mentioned that spiritual protection over. There's nobody that can separate us from God. There's no one that can do it. I want to keep reading here. I have a lot of other scriptures that I should be throwing in here, but let's read on through the end of this chapter here about Daniel. It says in verse 24, And the king gave command, and they brought those men who accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. This was a pretty severe deal. King Darius was not happy about this. He knew and realized what they had done. And he didn't just throw those men in it. Look what else he did. It says, And them and their children and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. They were eaten up and devoured before they hit the floor of that den. Those lions were hungry. And that shows you the protection that God put over Daniel that night also. Those lions were hungry. And only the power of God could stop them from hurting Daniel. Verse 25, Then the king Darius wrote, To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. Here, they did not serve God. They were very contrary to God, these people here. And he's making a decree that we tremble and we fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and he rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? It wasn't just this one instance. Darius has seen other instances. Darius has seen the power of God before, and he knew the God that Daniel served. Again, and here's a group that they worshiped idols. They worshiped all kinds of things. But this, I declare to you, is the living God. He is the living God. He's steadfast forever. It says in verse 28, So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Again, in Daniel, they were in captivity at this time to the Persians, to this empire. But he rose above all them, and he found esteem in King Darius. And it says in the last verse there, he prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus to follow. Again, the evidence was shown. It was seen, the power of God. The faithfulness of Daniel proved the power of God. And the king realized that. People realized that. I want to read a couple verses here. Let's go to Romans. We have plenty of evidence that God exists. Let's go to Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. And that's I think, probably the main point of the lesson that Carrie taught the young students today is the power of God. And there's so much evidence that he does exist. Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, it says, "For since the creation of the world, his visible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." Everybody should recognize that there is something out there powerful that causes everything to be held in the balance and for things to be renewing themselves. The things that happen, there's so much evidence that God does exist. And the more that we see science try to prove that God doesn't exist, the more evidence that he is there and that he does exist. They can't prove it. If there was ever proof, we would see it and we would hear it on every airwave there was. But they haven't been able to do it, and the more they try, the more they show that he does exist and that he does have the power that he does have. We never need to lose confidence in God. Hebrews chapter 11, Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 23, it says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful." Again, there's so much evidence that God does exist. And Darius knew it. Daniel knew it. And Darius made a proclamation that everyone understood this is the one, the true living God. And made a proclamation that they all recognize him as that. Again, as Christians, I want to keep going back to that verse. For some reason, I don't know why, it just hit me when we sang that song. We're the only ones. We're the only ones. I don't care what the world does, what the world says, what the devil does. And when we say the world, that's the devil after us. What he says, what he does to us, what he does to this physical body, how it affects us in our jobs, our life, and everything that we do. We cannot lose God because of what the devil does. As it said in that verse, what a sorrow it would be if we lost you. We cannot lose God. Be able to come to the end of our day and be like Paul said, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I've kept the faith." If there's anyone here this morning who needs to put Christ on a baptism to start that journey, that journey starts at baptism, as we talked about Paul. Said at the end of that, as when he was baptized, he started studying with those Christians that were there in Damascus. And immediately in the next verse it says he went into the world and started preaching. Again, we have a duty. It doesn't stop at baptism. Our life starts at baptism. Take it and run with it. If there's anyone here that needs to start that life, needs to put Christ on in baptism, needs to get back on the right track. Maybe we haven't been faithful. Maybe we need prayers. Maybe we need help. We're here for you. We got so many brothers and sisters in this congregation that love you, each other. We're here to help each other. We all want to be walking through those pearly gates hand in hand. If there's anyone here that needs to come forward for any reason, we ask that you come while together we stand and sing.